How much of an advantage do no tax states actually have? And which team in a tax location has a chance to contend for the Stanley Cup?
Your Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
And welcome into this Wednesday, July 24th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We're to your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez from the Hockey News. You can follow me on X at Monoman12, follow the show account on X and Instagram at L_FLA Panthers. And shout out to the everydayers who come back here and get your daily Florida Panthers fix. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As the playoffs wind down, the sports stop sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone. Every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. So, Florida Panther fans, grateful to be back here on another edition of the show to discuss more about the Summer of Champions once again here on the show. Very excited as with this show being on July 24th makes 1 month since the Florida Panthers have won the Stanley Cup. Can you believe it's been a month? And great to discuss this, not only it being a month, but more on what the champs are up to, what they've been up to lately too. 1 month after the fact of lifting Lord Stanley's Cup, it is another edition of Winans Wednesday. Jacob Winans is back here on the show. And Jacob, can you believe it? 1 month since all of our dreams have come true.
Oh man, it still doesn't feel like this is real life. I can't even begin to tell you how many times I've watched the end of Game 7 just on a loop over the past month. It never gets old. Just finding a new player to watch during that sequence and just seeing the excitement. The fans and just kind of being on YouTube and finding all the different fan angles and everything. It's we're going to enjoy this one for a very, very long time. I've watched that a bunch. I've watched Kulikov's save and Reinhart's goal probably a triple digit amount of times. Can't help myself. This has been the coolest month. But time's flying. We're getting close to starting prep for training camp, and the new season is going to be starting soon. But we continue the Summer of Champions.
Yes, as when this episode drops, it'll be 76 days until opening night. The most recent Panther to wear number 76, Anton Levchi, for the Panthers to wear that number for them. But a lot has happened with what the champs have been up to lately since the last time I recorded a show. And so a lot has happened with individuals where now obviously guys have gone their separate ways. It's the summer, so a few things have happened. So there has been a game where the all-stars of the KHL have faced off against some of the NHL stars from here in the US and Canada. And one of the biggest things to come out of that, at least from a Florida Panthers perspective, has been the questions that someone like Igor Shesterkin was getting, just comparing one to the other and then eliminating as another, just choosing one. And then eventually towards the end, it was Vasilevsky versus Sergei Bobrovsky. He chose Bobrovsky over Vasilevsky. Maybe some recency bias there. And obviously the last one being Bobrovsky against himself. And obviously Igor going to be humble too, saying Bobrovsky, but it also goes to show the respect that there is for the two-time Vezina Trophy winner and also a recent Stanley Cup champion too. So, hey, he's got that title there, at least from one of the best. So great to see the praise there for him. But also some of the players for the Panthers, Mikola Luosterainen, Lundell, Barkov, along with assistant coach Timo Ruutu, have visited the president of Finland there, and we saw a few. We were actually doing a little bit of research right prior to recording, Jacob. A pretty cool thing that I saw right before was Alexander Stubb. We've actually found out the pronunciation of it. He had a TED talk talking about happiness a few years ago too. So pretty cool thing that I ran into as well. But I also want to give you a floor on something else that you brought up to me prior to recording too. But also your reaction to the KHL versus NHL All Stars too. So I'm going to give you the floor a little bit here.
Yeah, so I'll start with the KHL versus NHL All Stars. That was a really cool idea. I like seeing that. I don't know if you saw any of the highlights from that, but Artemi Panarin tried an absolutely insane move on a breakaway in that game. Just kind of a lacrosse style, picked the puck up and spun it and whipped it at the goal. If that would have gone in, would have made all the highlight reels for the next decade. That was really cool, just seeing a little bit of hockey in the summertime. But yeah, I thought Shesterkin's comments were awesome. No one can question how good of a goalie he is. He's the next up, and kind of a tradition of really, really strong Russian goaltenders. You think Bobrovsky, you think Vasilevsky, you think Shesterkin, you think Ilya Sorokin, Semyon Varlamov. These are all this generation of Russian goalies that's in the NHL right now. It's a really impressive group. But Sergei Bobrovsky is probably the most decorated out of them when it comes to the Vezina trophies. He now has a Stanley Cup. Statistically, he stacks up as one of the best goalies to ever play. And it's no secret he's a role model and a guy that younger Russian goalies look up to. It's for the better part of the past decade, it's been Vasilevsky and Bobrovsky as the two kind of iconic Russian goaltenders, and now Shesterkin, Sorokin are probably the next two to come up. Shesterkin losing that series to Bob, I'm sure that'll only improve his career trajectory, but he's on a similar path. So I thought the humility there, the respect there was really cool to see from two guys who were rivals in a series, but there's definitely a ton of mutual respect there from a younger goalie looking up to the older goalie. You always like to see that. And then, the Finland topic I thought was really cool. If Barkov wanted to become the president of Finland, I'm sure he'd have all the votes. He's the man of the hour over there. And I thought it was really cool seeing them get to meet the president, especially given that the Panthers will be playing 2 games in Finland. I think that's really
November
cool.
1st and 2nd.
Yep, correct. And it helps. That's against the Dallas Stars team that also rosters their fair share of Finnish stars. Heiskanen, Esa Lindell, Roope Hintz. They've got some really good Finnish talent on that team. But it only helps the Panthers brand. Not that they need any help in Finland. Everyone in Finland probably owns a Barkov jersey. But it's very cool to see the first Finnish captain lift the Stanley Cup and now get to celebrate with their president. But you did bring up that President Alexander Stubb gave a TED talk on happiness. Fun fact: Finland has won or has been named the happiest country on earth 7 years in a row, which is really interesting. And I think they can probably safely put number 8 in the bank now that Barkov has brought a Stanley Cup back to Finland, and they're going to get to see the Panthers versus the Stars twice. That can only boost the happiness in that country. But it doesn't shock me, because if you look at the personalities and the demeanor of the Finnish guys the Panthers have on their team, it's the most mild-mannered guys, the most laid-back, most welcoming, friendly guys that we have on this team, especially Barkov. He exemplifies everything about that. And I think looking at the way they celebrated the Stanley Cup, I think they're making Finland's case for them for an 8th straight happiest country in the world title.
Yeah, and for giving them a jersey too, and pictures of them having a dinner there. What an experience that must have been for them. But another and very important topic, as if you're watching this on the YouTube, you'll see my background is like, why do you have a background of a hockey team that says Broncos on the back? Phil Pritchard, keeper of the cup, also posted a picture of Josh Mahura with the Stanley Cup. Thought it was going to go to his hometown in Alberta. Maybe it did right before it made its way east to Buffalo. So questions on whether it was going there, but there was a picture of Josh Mahura with the picture in front of a plaque with the Humboldt Broncos there. And if you don't know the story, the team of the Humboldt Broncos had a had a crash where 13 people were killed, 16 were injured too, and back in 2018, and just a little bit of a dedication with that with the Stanley Cup. I know that Humboldt is 6 hours away from where Josh Mahura is from, but what a great dedication that was for Mahura in front of honoring that team.
Yeah, I thought so too. Mahura is a high character guy, and I thought that was a really cool gesture. Um, like you said, for those who don't remember, the Sticks Out for Humboldt movement gained a lot of traction after their tragic bus accident. Um, but I thought it was really, really classy, and not at all surprising from Josh Mahura. He's a first class, high character player and person, but to see him do that was really, really cool. I thought that was a great gesture, and kind of reminds you really what the Stanley Cup is all about. Sharing that with a community that has suffered greatly, and probably one of recent hockey's greatest tragedies. Give them a moment to celebrate a Stanley Cup and just be a part of that. I think it's really cool, and that's really what winning this thing is all about.
Yeah, and uplift the community, even if you can't bring them back, that they're still in your minds too. That's the great thing about it, and hopefully the families of the Humboldt Broncos, they have a little bit of healing as it's been, even if it's been 6 years with them, with the tragedy happening. But we're gonna transition over to segment number 2, where we're gonna have a discussion more about what's been going on with the conversation lately about tax states. Do they have an advantage? Do they not? And we're gonna discuss what has happened in the last few years with the Stanley Cup, and also continue if there is an opportunity for tax states to recover. We are going to discuss that more next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, and I love sports, and sometimes, and I love them so much I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games, and the sports aren't sporting like we want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up all the bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. And once again, I'd like to thank you guys, as always, for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day here on a Wednesday, a Winans Wednesday edition of the show, where once again, it's been 1 month since the Florida Panthers have won the Stanley Cup. Also, another thing that we didn't mention in segment 1, Jacob, is the Matthew Tkachuk, Aaron Ekblad, and Carter Verhaeghe got to see Zach Bryan a few days ago in Sunrise, and the "Let's Go Panthers" chant went all around the arena. So pretty cool for them to also host the champs there, even if it's in their own home there. But let's discuss more of the topic at hand, about what the discussion has been for the state of the NHL. And I don't think it paints the picture of just saying tax states or no tax states whenever it comes to contending for a Stanley Cup, because Panthers, for the longest time, their first 29 years, not being able to lift the cup, and a lot of those years being really down years too. But also but also we can't deny what's happened in the last at least 8 years in the NHL, where you look at Panthers, Golden Knights. That's no teams of no taxes. Tampa Bay, Dallas, but that was actually, it wasn't based on salary cap ramifications yet. But I think it's also a conversation because of what's happened lately with the salary cap ramifications too, of a flat cap too. Recently, there's been a graph that was put out on revenues of how it's generated through the other leagues. And the NHL has, when it comes to gate-driven revenue, they're the most out of all the pro sports leagues. And in my opinion, that's a little bit of a problem. And the TV rights deal is the lowest too. And maybe there's some relation to maybe there could be a change based on the state of the NBA with what's going on with their TV rights deal. Turner Sports decided to match it, but there's nothing's official yet. So, COVID, the flat cap, and also the first few years of the flat cap, it was a seller's market. It didn't become a buyer's market until the last deadline, knowing what's on the horizon with the escrow being paid back. So, but also a lot of teams in this situation, during this, have done it to themselves about trapping themselves. You think of the New York Islanders with a whole bunch of guys under contract with term and no move clauses. St. Louis too. Minnesota is a little bit different because Bill Guerin did not give the contracts to Zach Parise and Ryan Suter. He did the right thing of buying them out, but still, they're in a little bit of purgatory until that gets cleared. So when you think of the no tax states and the advantages, what do you how are you processing this when you hear out fans outside of Florida complain about it?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of a flimsy argument, just given that it's one of those things where no one cares, no one has anything to say about it until the teams are winning.
Mm-hmm.
When the Panthers were irrelevant and when they were bottom feeders and they were uh, near the bottom of the standings and they were starting their seasons during the rebuild, just hoping to get to the cap floor. You don't hear anything about the tax advantages. David Dwork, in his article, hit the nail right on the head. The players aren't coming here because of a tax advantage. Players are coming here because they want to win. Um, the tax advantage has nothing to do with the trades that are made. The tax advantage has nothing to do with the waiver claims. The tax advantage had nothing to do with picking up Carter Verhaeghe off the free agent pile when no one else wanted him after he was not given a qualifying offer. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Tax advantages didn't cause Carolina to waive Gus Forsling and the Panthers to pick him up. The smart drafting of Anton Lundell has nothing to do with tax advantages. These are our hockey moves that built this team. Matthew Tkachuk getting traded to the Panthers for Huberdeau, Uyghur, Kolschwin in a first. That's a bold move that was ripped by most people when it happened. That doesn't have anything to do with tax advantages. Matthew Tkachuk was probably going to get a very similar contract anywhere. Jonathan Huberdeau's deal comes in $1 million per year higher than Tkachuk's because maybe there's some element of tax there, but it was also because Huberdeau was a 115-point scorer that season on a President's
Mm-hmm.
Trophy winning team. It didn't have to do with the fact that Calgary has to pay him more because there's higher taxes here. He earned that salary. So I think personally, I think the whole tax advantages argument, I think it's tired. If we want to really talk about the advantage that some of these recent champions have had, hasn't really had anything to do with tax advantages. It's had to do with a lot of LTIR manipulation. If you look at Vegas, if you look at Tampa, both of their recent Stanley Cups, they were well over the salary cap. Vegas did the same thing. The Mark Stone yearly trade deadline IR stint. These are things that you need to look at more than tax advantages. And the Panthers were. I may be wrong on Colorado. I don't know if Colorado was over the cap when they won their cup. I'd have to fact check that. But outside of Colorado, that I know for certain, the Panthers are the only Stanley Cup champion in the last 5 champions to be cap compliant when winning their Stanley Cup. And I think that's something that you have to look at more than the tax advantages. But where that's concerned, I think it's a tired argument, and I think I don't know. I think it's looking for excuses where there are none. Guys take hometown discounts because they want to be here and they want to win. Gus Forsling, sure, he could have gotten more on the open market, but his playoff breakout comes after the extension, and it's just smart business. Sign him before the playoff breakout. You predict what he's capable of, and you reward him. And if he didn't want to be here, he wouldn't have signed it. I don't think it has anything to do with the tax situation.
Mm-hmm. And then you think about Edmonton most recently just getting to the Stanley Cup final. I mean, they're favored. They're probably favored to go back and look at the lateral some of the moves that they made, bringing in Jeff Skinner to the mix, Victor Arvidsson. Now that's they're the favorite, and they're not they're in a place that's taxed. But even going back to a team that is in a tax state, in the Dallas Stars, you had two contracts that were considered quote unquote bad in Sagan and Ben for the longest time. But look what has happened: development for draft picks and building up what they did. And you mentioned Colorado; that was a team built through the draft too, in a tax state too. So that's also, there are advantages. Obviously, I mean, the NHLPA is probably not pleased about Reinhart's deal as not a rising tide lift all boats kind of deal. But I mean, let's once again consider where Reinhart came from in the early parts of his career. Like, do you want to go back to something like that, even if you're paid more money too? So
yeah, and there's two quick points I want to make on this before we spend too much time on it. But where the tax advantage argument is concerned, if it were such a big advantage and other teams couldn't compete with the fact that the Panthers are in a state where there's a tax advantage, one, the Panthers had to go through Tampa to even win the Cup. We're in the same state. It's not like we had some great tax advantage over a team that's in the same state. That's head to head. That's right there in front of you. I don't think that has anything to do with it. But where the tax advantage situation is concerned, if the Panthers had such a huge advantage and they could afford to pay more to guys, we lost so much of our depth this offseason. We couldn't keep Montour. You couldn't keep Stanley. You couldn't keep Lomberg. You couldn't keep Mahura. These are all guys that you couldn't keep. Tarasenko. These are guys that didn't take, aside from Montour, it didn't take earth-shattering amounts of money to leave. They're getting raises in other places, and if the Panthers had such a huge tax advantage, easily could have matched those offers and kept them. So it's not what it's made out to be. Lomberg takes a deal making $2 million a year in Calgary. Panthers could, if the Panthers had such a huge tax advantage, could have matched that with somewhere around $1 million a year. The way that this is discussed, and I think it's flimsy, and I also think it's a disservice to star players in other cities to say that they only get paid as much as they do because of the tax situation. I think you're kind of doing your own stars a disservice if you're, say, a Toronto fan. You're saying, oh, Austin Matthews' AAV is only this high because of the tax situation. No, he's earned his money. He's earned his contract because he's one of the greatest goal scorers of a generation. And you could say that across the board for cities who are indirectly bad-mouthing their own stars by saying they don't deserve their money and they only got it because they're in a state that pays more taxes. I don't know. It's just another way of looking at it.
It's like a never-ending loop of trying to find something. Also people don't want to be in those places because, I mean, Ryan O'Reilly even said it. It's not even he didn't mention anything about taxes. He mentioned, at least publicly, pressure too. So we can understand a little bit. So there are different variables and different reasons why people go where. And hey, some people want to be in a certain place. I'm sure Mitch Marner, Toronto boy, even though a lot of people want him out, I don't think he wants to leave. And when it comes to money and everything. So that's actually that we'll leave it there. And also, San Jose was a contender for over a decade, and they had their chances too. And that's a tax.
LA Kings.
They won multiple cups. Yeah, so it's tired, but we'll transition over to segment number 3. We're going to discuss which of the teams in tax states have an opportunity to rise above now that the cap is going up. We will discuss that more here next on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Segment number 3 here on this Wednesday, July 24th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. And Jacob, it's funny because we spoke about not only the taxes, but the impact of COVID with the TV deal. It's so crazy with the deal and how sometimes the NHL doesn't have really much control. Do you remember that Edmonton and Vegas, their Western Conference final game 6 was on a Sunday night, 10 p.m. on ESPN instead of doing 7 p.m. on ESPN2 because of the fact that they didn't want to interfere with Sunday Night Baseball too. That's also another reason why maybe there's so much to squeeze when it comes to not only the slots but affecting the salary cap too. But with the NHL, they did it to themselves even before this TV deal with NBC doing one network too. So that was a
Mhm.
ripple. Maybe that was they're still feeling the effects of their previous TV deal. Would you say?
Yeah, I would agree, and I think as much as we loved the NBC era, with the iconic Doc Emmerich calls,
Hmm.
and we love that NBC era. Um, it should have been a little bit more spread out. I think as a growing league, as a league that's trying to gain more mainstream popularity, which the NHL was at the time and still is, you got to diversify a little bit. The NBA, we've seen the NBA, of course, their TNT coverage is an absolute hit. Everyone loves it. And obviously, with the word coming out that Turner plans to match any offer, that's exciting for NBA fans. But you can also look at the ESPN coverage. You can look at the iconic Mike Breen calls, and everyone knows ESPN coverage of the NBA as well. Uh, I know during the Heat's Big Three era, we used to love seeing those Heat versus Celtics, Heat versus Bulls, Heat versus Pacers games. The NBA Sunday afternoons on ABC. It's those kind of things where you have to be spread out across multiple networks to really grow your brand. And that's sort of all built towards the 2016 NBA TV deal where they were able to massively grow their salary cap in one summer. And I think the NHL is trying to build toward that now with the ESPN coverage, with TNT coverage. Should have done that before. So yes, you're definitely right. They're still feeling the effects of not having a diversified, really menu of options for people to watch. It was just one or two NBC games a week, and then just regional, and that's not going to get it done when you're trying to grow the league. But they're on the right track now. I think the product itself has to get a little better where the broadcast is concerned. ESPN, I personally don't have an issue with ESPN announcers like the knowledge base. It's just the coverage has been lacking a little bit. The production is not up to the standard that they have for other sports, which is it's a work in progress. It's new. We're still early on in this deal. They're gonna grow. They're gonna develop. But there's definitely the talent there. There's the John Buccigrosses of the world. PK Subban can get on people's nerves, but he's popular and he brings
Great,
personality.
in my opinion.
Yeah, he's fantastic. TNT, they've got their guys. I'm not a big fan of Paul Bissonnette, but that panel, there's guys that draw attention and they bring eyes, and then just a lot of the crossover stuff. When you bring on Charles Barkley or you bring on Shaq, people love that
Even
kind
the
of thing.
baseball guys too. Pedro Martinez too. They brought him in.
Yep, they did bring in Pedro Martinez. That kind of stuff helps. It helps reach across the aisle to a different audience. So they're on the right track now. Just honing in on the product, honing in on the production. Takes some time. They're doing the right things, but I think over time we'll start to see the benefits of them finally having a bit of a diversified audience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and going back to taxes and TV deals and everything. Now that escrow's paid, we're now seeing a rise in the cap, and also one thing that I think is really going to help this time is the fact that Arizona now being in Utah, now more gate-driven revenue with 12,000 fans at least instead of 4 or 5,000. That's going to affect next year's cap big time. But also I think about all the maybe other teams that might rise above that are tax that are in places that are taxed. I think of teams that could recover from it, or things that could or teams that could be under pressure. We mentioned LA. I think the Byfield contract could be the next best value contract in the NHL. Maybe we still have to see a little bit. Buffalo and Ottawa, they're in a little bit of a strange place where the coach is different. but one place in Ottawa, the GM is different. So there might not be a lot of pressure for them. This might be still of a little bit of a slow build for them. There's a lot of pressure on Kevin Adams for the Buffalo Sabres to just get to the playoffs too. The New York Rangers, they have a little bit of a theirs has nothing to do with taxes. Theirs has to do with the fact that Jacob Trouba has requested not to be traded because of things going on with his wife and in school because of COVID, holding a year back with her schooling too. So that's also something to consider of things that have held back. So the Rangers are a little bit under pressure. Detroit, lots of lateral moves too. The eyes are it's a slow build for them too, but there's a lot of impatience going on in Detroit too. But I also think one team that could maybe rise above this, the Vancouver Canucks. I really like the Jake DeBrusk signing. Under 6, can get you 20 goals too. And Shelovs, Arthur Shelovs, a guy who was part of World Championships for Latvia, they extend him, and it's a very inexpensive deal for them too. So I think when you think about other teams that in different places who have a chance to make something out of this, but the Winnipeg Jets are still a wild card because we don't know what's going to go on with Nikolai Ehlers, Rutger McGorty, or do they trade for Marty Necas? That's still a little bit of a conversation there for what happens with Winnipeg next. But what are the teams that you're looking for, at least the tax state teams, to possibly rise above now that things are starting to get back to normal in the rise of the cap?
Yeah, well, the very obvious one is Edmonton. I think Edmonton is probably the favorite to win the Cup next year. I think they had probably the best free agency as far as smart, low risk, high reward signings. I think Jeff Skinner, I think Victor Arvidsson. I think that team is probably best positioned as far as the tax teams to come out on top. I think they're in a really, really good spot. Pressure's high there. It's always going to be high. But McDavid now has a taste of the Stanley Cup final. I think that's only going to motivate him. We've seen what that can do firsthand. So I think Edmonton's the obvious answer if they can get good goaltending. Vancouver's another one. I think Vancouver has a really good shot. They let a couple guys go. Nikita Zadorov will be a loss. The way he played in the postseason was very impressive, but we're never going to match that term in AAV, and probably better that they didn't. I think Boston's going to have buyer's remorse about that one. So they've got as good a chance as anybody. LA's somewhat on the rise, but they're kind of stuck in this weird position where they're building a young core, but also have their aging veterans who are still productive. So you can't really push those guys out and bring in the new young crops. They're sort of stuck in the middle a little bit. The Atlantic Division is probably where I would look to see where I would look towards some quick rebuilders, teams that are going to be a lot better in the near future. So I think Boston will eventually, hopefully, start to slow down. They keep defying age, and Father Time doesn't seem to catch up to some of those guys. But and they've done a really good job rebuilding or supplementing their core on the fly. As aging veterans have retired, they've done a really good job of bringing in younger guys on cheap deals and still being productive. And their defense is one of the best in the NHL, if not the best in the NHL, and still is. So Boston, you can never count them out. But I think Buffalo's building in the right direction. Ottawa doesn't seem to have a great sense of direction, but they do have a lot of talent. Detroit seems to be just a weird collection of veterans and young players, but their young core is really talented too. So those three teams, but the one no one's really talking about here, even though they're always in the news in Canada, is Montreal has drafted well recently. They have a really good young core, and some of those young guys have played in a Stanley Cup final, even though it was coming out of the Canadian division. That's a team that I think their rebuild could be going in the right direction. They get Slavkovsky locked up long term, and he showed that he has really, really, really high potential. The second half of this past season, they've got Caulfield, Suzuki, Sam Montembeault has emerged as a legitimate starter, might have a shot playing for Team Canada, former Panther there. I like what they're building. I like what Montreal's building. I think they could be another team that that could come out of the Atlantic and sort of rise above the tax situation with smart drafting, young players locked up on team friendly deals. I think that's another option.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a lot of young defensemen for the Montreal Canadiens.
Almost too many.
Yeah, and also they're gonna have to start making trades too, because you could only have so many contracts on your. I mean, right now they have 42 contracts on their team on their books, but I mean they still have a lot of draft picks. Montreal, like 2 firsts, 2 seconds, 3 thirds, 2 fours, just next year too. So they're gonna have to eventually turn those into players. Eventually, I mean, hey, you're using the flat cap during that time to use it. So eventually, now when things open up, now you can. And Slavkovsky, I mentioned Byfield's contract. Slavkovsky's can look really, really good by the end of
big
it.
Time.
And I still think they need another center, too, a number 1 center. I think Suzuki's more of a second line center, maybe kind of like Nico Hischier in New Jersey, too.
Yep.
Ivan Demidov that's a really high prize prospect that they drafted recently, too. So possibly a team that could rise above, maybe not immediately, but in the next few years, possibly, as Kent Hughes and Marty St. Louis are looking to build something. And hey, they were at least honest with themselves after making the final, knowing that, hey, you still got to reset things possibly here. But Jacob, I want to thank you so much once again for joining me on another edition of Winans Wednesday, another successful Winans Wednesday here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Tell everybody where they can follow you online, my friend.
Yep, you can find me on X at Jacob Winans 8 as we continue the Summer of Champions. This has been a lot of fun.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much, my friend, and I will see you next week.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. Can't wait.
And if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows on Locked On NHL Network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey, Flip Livingstone, and Steel Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. So I'm Armando Velez with Jacob Winans, and you've been listening to the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, with your team every day.